Another story time, and it's the history of the Red Ribbon Army. Red Ribbon. Oh shit, Red Ribbon Army. Yeah, not that kind of Red Ribbon though, the RR. And all of that shit. So it started way back in the day with Commander Red. He sought the Dragon Balls to take over the world essentially and like roll over it as a dictator. Um, like as like that type, like a military totalitarian dictatorship, some type, something to that degree, essentially. You know, that's why he wanted the Dragon Balls. He wanted the Dragon Balls so he could rule. They were already making moves on the world, though. They were already taking people's shit, Like, they took this girl's fucking home, right? Goku was, like, put onto this behavior. Or not put onto this behavior, but what I'm saying is he found out how they were behaving. Because, like, Goku's a kid and shit, right? And he doesn't understand, like, other people right away. But these red ribbon soldiers are, tearing through this bitch's, this little girl's, home and shit, and taking her father away and taking her food and weapons and shit. We heard word that there was a boy here who had a Dragon Ball. See, they were after the Dragon Balls. They came back, after pillaging the village for, what they needed to like make the army stronger and everything else, right? So then they Goku was like, no, you can't fuck with these people, and that's my friends, and you have a doctor, and this ain't Dr. Gero, this is some other doctor who was, doing some things, helping to create some, technology for him, like the little fucking robots that they fly around on, and the like weapons they use to like fight with. We're the most unstoppable force on the planet. They had Colonel Silver, who was hunting down Goku's dick, for the Dragon Balls. They had General White. They were fighting. Goku was fighting them in Muscle Tower, back in the day in the OG Dragon Ball. He went through the tower. He fought Metalotron, who was a creation of the Red Ribbon Army and their doctors that they had. You know, these androids were created to fight against people like Goku and Master Roshi. Specifically, these were the people who were like martial artists, real martial artists who could, stop them on their way to, basically take over the world. Um, and these are just humans who, take from other humans and run that, army. Like, we're here to, collect a Dragon Ball. But it's mostly them chasing Goku, for the Dragon Balls, because he's also after the Dragon Balls. But, General White was running Muscle Tower. He had run through Mirasaki, who was a ninja who was, contracted to work for them, because he's, a ninja who knows shit, but, Goku made it like work with him, right? And who else did they have there? And they had Ader. See, Ader, and then this leads into the android. Ader is Ader, he's an android. He's android number 8. Androids 1 through 7 were never heard of because these androids were like not up to par to like even fuck with somebody of Goku's caliber. And Goku back then was like not a he's not even a fucking like he's a problem, and that's why they're making these androids and shit. But he's not like Goku we know in Dragon Ball Super. He's not, like that. So I said all that, and Android 8 was actually, could have been a problem for Goku had he actually like been like he was programmed to do. But what he did was he had emotions. He was like I don't feel like hurting people. You know, I don't want to do that. This is wrong. You know, had the like, their goals been for like the right reasons, but they're taking from other people, when they don't have to. They're telling, and Goku was, nice to Ader and, told him, you shouldn't work for these guys. They're just using you. You know, real friends wouldn't do shit like that. That type of thing. And then he was like, you know what? He's right. Because he was still trying to, do what his creators wanted him to. And then he was like, fuck this. I'm done being nice to you people. And I'm going to, be kind and I'm going to help out, the righteous ones, the ones who are doing right. Goku's my friend, you know? And he, like, told them to fuck off, basically, you know? General White was defeated and Muscle Tower was, just, done with. Now they had a fool called General or Commander Blue. Blue was on his way towards the Dragon Ball at the bottom of the sea. This man was a blonde with blue eyes. He had paralysis. He had a way of looking at somebody and stunning. You know, it was his like secret technique. It's what he used on like combatants to like get the edge. You know, and that's what his gimmick was, and it worked. It even worked on Goku too, but then Goku was able to get the upper hand on him and defeated him. Now he went back to Commander Red with his tail between his legs, and he's like, "Hey, with his Irish ginger accent, and what did you do? I thought you were gonna get the Dragon Balls for me, and shit like that." But then after that, right? He had a fight with a guy named Mercenary Tao, and Tao was powerful in the martial arts world. Um, he dismissed General Blue like this, y'all. He stuck his tongue out and like broke his skull, basically. I think he died from shit like that. Um, as a like practitioner of like crane style martial arts, like his brother. Um, Shen, he went and became a mercenary because he had a falling out with his brother, and then the Red Ribbon Army recruited him. We need you to take on that boy called Goku, and everybody is like fucking inept in this army and other things, man. You need to like teach that boy a lesson. So he went and he like he took down one of the pillars and he threw it, and he went towards Korin Tower and he actually wore Goku down a bit. Now he went up to the tower and Goku learned from Korin, how to move like more effectively, essentially, you know, and not waste his energy and just moving the right way, better technique. And so when he came down from the mountain, it was as if he was like stronger. When he was stronger, but he was like, it wasn't even the water, Korin's water, that did that. It was just, the training to get the water from Korin. And, Mercenary Tao was like, I need to go up to the tower and get that. Since that boy was able to do it, I can do it too. And he went up there and he did the thing. He came back down and Goku was still, better than he was. He tried to throw a grenade at Goku to take him out, like resulting to shit that he usually wouldn't, you know, and he ended up getting, getting fucked up. He had to, get, um, repairs. He became a cyborg basically. So after that, the Red Ribbon Army was like, Goku was like done with these motherfuckers. Like this boy was like done. Like, you're hunting my dick. You're like going after the Dragon Balls. I know you have the Dragon Balls. I'm gonna have to face you guys eventually. And like everybody else was like, that's Goku and shit. He's cool, but like he's just a boy. We can't send him to do this shit by himself. And Goku was like, I don't care. I have to do this. I've been through it already, so I know what I'm up against. So he went against these guys, and he defeated them all. He ran through everybody. The a staff officer Black was defeated, and then General Red was shot dead by him. But they were all handled, and Goku defeated the Red Ribbon Army single-handedly. However, Dr. Gero was still at work in his basement. He was the only one that got away. You know, this would happen years later to come back and bite him in the ass. This is in Dragon Ball Z. This is where shit gets interesting. Um, as far as the like Red Ribbon Army's technology department goes, because Dr. Gero was a part of their, technology department and like, that type of thing, developing, androids. Android 8 Aider was a one of his, better projects, in the early, part of it. But he grew, some feelings towards people, and he kind of, he wasn't able to be controlled, and that's what they're looking for, and that's what he's looking for as Dr. Gero, and he wanted to, get revenge on Goku, so he, went hard. I don't know, these 9 through 15, or not through 15, 9 through 11, 12, these fucking androids, these motherfuckers were, nothing, like nothing's known about them. Only 8, and then androids started popping up. Once Trunks showed up, from the future, he defeated Frieza, and then he warned them of Android 17 and 18. Um, but what I'm telling you all the history and shit. So like even like non-canonical shit, but like they're canonical, nigga, because they are, because like there wouldn't be Android 13, 14, and 15, and like other people too that watch this, man. That, and like in the seventh movie of Dragon Ball Z, there's that little there's the redneck who's like he has the hat, and he's like, I'm gonna dispatch and dispose of you, saying I'm gonna dispose of you guys. um have you guys, looking foolish, and they were looking foolish at first, but then they turned Super Saiyan and they turned it on. And Android 13 was fighting Goku. He's the white-haired redneck guy. Then there was a guy who had he had big muscles, and he had like long hair, musculous, fuck, and not as big as Broly, but he was kind of fucking swole, and he was fighting against Trunks in that movie. And then Android 15 was a little guy that Vegeta was fighting. He was purple and he was small, but he was like, they fucked shit up. They went to the mall and fucked shit up, and like that started the whole conflict between them and the Saiyans. They ended up turning the fuck up and defeating these androids in the like in the ice like parts of their world, like the North Pole or some shit, right? They fought like in a cold area and defeated him. And now that's the thing about Android 13, because Android 14 and 15 were like, scrap metal after a while. Android 13 took their parts and components and added them to his self. So he became more powerful, stronger, faster, more durable. And they had to team up. Goku defeated him. You know, it's in people's, top 10, top 5 movies of all time. Not me personally, but it was an all right movie, you know, and that showed the work of Dr. Gero as far as 13, 14, and 15 goes. Now, when you go to the canonical material, the known canonical material of Dragon Ball Z, that's like undisputably, canonical, right? We get into 16, 17, and 18. Once Gero, now he turned himself into Android 20. I know this is kind of getting crazy, but this if you watched. And if you haven't watched, I'm letting you know right now. Android 20 and 19 were created. Now this is a thing. Android 16 was freed after, Android 17 and 18 woke up, right? Android 16 is a full android, just like Ader, except he is like following the program that he's designed to do. Now, what is he programmed to do? Defeat Goku. And like he's, hooked up with all this like powerful technology that could, actually defeat Goku. The Goku that, his data, has. So he has data on Goku, right? Certain, um, things he knows about Goku. The Goku before they went to Namek and shit. So he was like, I'm ready to take him on. He's powerful enough to take on that Goku. And then Android 17 and 18 were ones who were human, and then they were turned into androids. Now they had a switch inside of him. You know, he was trying to control them. They were programmed and designed to defeat Goku as well, but they were human models. Um, and what they had was perpetual energy. They could, keep on, they could raise their key and, keep spamming key blast like continuously, like nonstop if they wanted to. Um, so that's an issue, for the Saiyans, and out of those three, some people might say Android 16 was a fucking guy and shit, right? But I would say Android 17 was the guy. And like, I don't, disagree with those statements. Android 18 was also, a fucking problem at that time in the story. She defeated my favorite character in the fight, that was before he went through training and everything else, mind you, but he was a Super Saiyan and she was able to, take that shit down. Like beat him up a little bit. And she, they were a problem, and that's what led the Saiyans to power up again and become stronger. Um, but Android 19 and 20, 19 is also like 16, except unlike 16, Android 19 is weaker, but can absorb an energy attack that a enemy shoots at him. So Kamehameha was absorbed. Key blasts from certain people were absorbed by Android 19. Um, and then it like boosts his power a little bit. But Vegeta was able to defeat him like low diff, basically no diff actually. He wasn't that good of an android. Um, Not a match against the Saiyans and shit. He couldn't stack up. Um, and then like 16, 17, and 18, they could stand up to the Saiyans in like Super Saiyan form as they were before they went into the hyperbolic time chamber. But after that shit happened, they weren't, on their level no more. The Saiyans had them beat. But Android 20 was Dr. Gero, as I said. And Dr. Gero, he died because he's Android 17 and 18 woke up and, he was like, I'm going to, control you guys. I have this remote. Android 17 snatched that shit. He said, man, we're going to move on our own time. You had us in the fucking, sleep. You had us asleep for, years. We don't know when they fucking were made and shit, but goddamn, we were asleep. You know, we don't need you, fucking with us. We know why we're created. We know what the fuck we're getting into. We don't need you fucking controlling us any further. So then he was defeated by his own creation. Fitting for a doctor, a scientist, who wanted to like push his fucking limits with shit, you know. But, with that, that's 20 androids, right? But I was, Cell, he was the perfect creation, the perfect being designed by Dr. Gero. So Cell was comprised of data, information from every Z fighter, Frieza, Trunks, all the Saiyans that were present, at that time. And he had the ability to grow even stronger, even like with that, like all that information on all those people, Yamcha, Tien, Piccolo, and he has their traits. He has the regeneration of Piccolo. He could use Tribe Beam or like Solar Flare from Krillin. He can use the the after image, the quadruple after image. He can fucking what? He can shoot Kamehameha. I already said that. But he absorbs people for biofuel in his first form. And like this guy is a creation of the Red Ribbon Army, like I said. He's a part of the fucking history too. He's not just some being that came out of nowhere. He's actually the best weapon that he was saving. Now Cell had to like wait a while. He was kind of forgotten about. he made Android 17 and 18 after, he started work on Cell, but then he was like, we have to like kind of like whatever, we'll let shit do its thing, the computer run itself, and like, whatever happens with him will happen, and I'll be proud or whatever the fuck, right? Because that's Dr. Duro. And he did that, right? And these little fucking like flies, had eyes, and that's how they were able to get the data on Goku and Vegeta when they were fighting each other. When Frieza came to Earth and fought Trunks, got all that information. So now once he achieved certain things, so he needed to absorb 17 and 18, and he even came back in time to do this. In another timeline, he killed Trunks and jumped into the time machine. He had to revert into his larvae state and then get out. Now, Piccolo was the first one to approach this animal, right? Piccolo had the ability to defeat him right on the spot. Like, let's not get it fucked up. He was a super Namekian at this point, and he had new powers and shit. He could have, but he was kind of like sizing him up too much, and like he got away because of the solar flare. Simple techniques, but then that like ended up biting them in the ass. He started absorbing humans, and then he absorbed like whole hell of towns, like I don't know, thousands of people, and it was enough to give him above Android 17 and Piccolo's level. Now the Saiyans were in the hyperbolic time chamber, so they were getting more, stronger, more powerful, right? So they could handle this fucking issue. But Cell then absorbed 17 and became Imperfect Cell, which is his second form, I guess. Tien tried to hold down, the best he could just to buy time. That's all he was. But like, I like Tien a little bit. He's like my third or second favorite character. We'll say he is my second favorite character. But he was doing his thing. He shot him down, and kept him at bay for a little bit. But then Android 18 was running around with Android 16. Krillin didn't kill Android 18. He could have like had her blow up, boom, and then like Cell couldn't achieve his perfect form because he needed 17 and 18 to do it. That's what he was designed to do: absorb 17 and 18, and then become a perfect android, the greatest creation of Dr. Dro, and that ended up happening. He absorbed 18, and then the Saiyans were like, easy work for him. Even when Goku and Gohan came out of the hyperbolic time chamber, they were easy work for him. He gave them the Cell games to train, and give them 10 days to train and see if they could, figure something out. Goku fought against him in the Cell games and was like, yeah, he's still more powerful than me, and I can't win. So then he put Gohan out there, knowing about Gohan's latent potential and everything else. Gohan being a boy that achieved Super Saiyan at a younger age than Goku or any other Saiyan, even as a half breed, would be able to fucking, go even higher. And he did. He achieved Super Saiyan 2. And this eventually led to the defeat of Cell, at the cost of Goku's life. Now, Cell was defeated and sent to hell, right? Now, later on, in the future, we got Dr. Hedo, I think is his name. And this is a super movie. I like how like the story was and everything. Like, Dr. Hedo is, doing things, he made Gamma 1 and Gamma 2, and then there's Cell Max, but I didn't like the animation. That's just my like, side, whatever. I'm just letting you know it's not my favorite movie because of the animation, but the movie ain't that bad. Um, from like an idea standpoint and other things. But and like another thing I didn't like though, hold on, there was another gripe I didn't like about it. It was the Cell thing. But let me talk about Gamma 1 and Gamma 2. Gamma 1 and Gamma 2 were after, Pan and shit, right? Um, And then Piccolo had to fight against him. He wanted to be strong enough to fight against these animals. So he wished to become more powerful. He had orange form. He got like orange aura, but then he became big orange, and he was fighting against these Gamma 1 and Gamma 2. These creatures were, I don't know, I would say they're more powerful than that cell that they fought a long time ago. That one, those two were. Um, but weaker than Majin Buu. You know, they were on like that type of timing and shit. Those two. Um, but then they had Cell in wait, because this is, Dr. Dro's grandson, I believe, or some shit, right? And he was like on his shit. This is a boy that was like, I need to like do better. I need to do better, than he did. So he created Cell Max. Now Cell Max was in an imperfect state, as like it's shown in other things. I don't know, like it's like his final form, but it's not his final form, because we know as Dragon Ball Z fans that if you watch Dragon Ball Z and you watch that movie, that looks like Cell's imperfect form. They could have done better with it. Maybe it's, hinting at a future project. That's all I'm saying. But for me, I didn't like that part of it. Cell's, imperfect form being the like main, thing. He could have evolved even further and made the fight even more interesting. But eventually, Cell Max came out, and that's Dr. Hedo. That's the grandson of Dr. Duro. So the Red Ribbon Army lives on with him, right? But then, Gohan powers up again to, Gohan Beast, the Beast transformation, which came out of nowhere. But he needed something to put him back on, like, the level of his father and fucking Vegeta. And also to defeat this thing called Cell Max. So Cell Max was then defeated by Gohan. Um, Gohan is just, a fucking guy now. And Cell was kind of a fucking letdown. The Cell Max, he was there. He was menacing for a little bit. He killed Piccolo, or almost killed Piccolo, in a like more powerful form. And then so he was a problem though. So Max still was. He was probably on like, man, I'll say like Jiren's level maybe. You know, even as it was, and I still think they could have done better. Like I said, that looks like an imperfect state to me. Um, But the Red Ribbon Army, like, they have to like stop fucking around with these stands. It just ain't a thing. I think they got the hint after that. I don't think Hedo's playing games no more, to my knowledge. Because I don't know about all the details of the manga. But the Red Ribbon Army is, they need to like stop fucking around, stop playing games. Um, they'll never beat Goku or his descendants. With that being said, that's the history of the Red Ribbon Army from the beginning to the end. In future projects, we may see Cell Max again in the like perfect form. Don't be surprised. I would like to see that personally, but if it don't happen, then it don't happen. But if it does, it's Dragon Ball Z, man. It probably will happen. But be cool on the corner, and that was the history of the Red Ribbon Army. You know, androids and like all of that shit, right? The people who were involved in everything else. But be cool on the corner.